Hi everyone, and welcome to an episode of Trident Talks. I'm Josh, the recruitment director here at Trident, and today I'm joined by Stewart Bertram, the director of intelligence at Deloitte. Stu, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So Stu, tell us a bit of an overview of your background, if you wouldn't mind. Who are you? How did you, obviously we know you're ex-Incore, but how did you get to where you are now, I suppose, as a director at Deloitte?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in, working probably for about the last 12 years or so, counting my time in the military and also my time in the private sector as well. With most of that in the private sector, I've done about 10 years in cybersecurity within the private sector across a number of organisations, with 5 years initially in military and, obviously in the Incore. I was quite lucky when I was in the sense that I did technical intelligence. So I was very focused on the more technical ends of intel work. So that acted as a bit of a stepping stone into very early days of cyber threat intelligence about 10 years ago. And so I've moved through various kind of roles that, have ranged from individual contributor to junior manager to more senior manager, back to individual contributor on larger projects, and then back to sort of, managing large teams and doing basically no threat intel, but just managing those teams and developing them. And that's really how I came to Deloitte. And, the reason for my move to Deloitte was to work really on larger bid projects, very large projects that are complex, have multiple kind of working parts, multiple elements, and not just threat intel. So other parts of security, and even things outside of, conventional cybersecurity, so like physical security and things like that. And then have multi-year delivery things. That was really the next step, sort of for me.
Nice. And you joined Deloitte. Was it just before lockdown, or was it during lockdown?
It was a day and a half before lockdown, but by then everybody had left. So I literally turned up, got my laptop, said hello to a few of the people on the front door, and that was the end of it. It was really surreal, like seeing essentially central London just completely deserted. I think I walked from our offices in Blackfriars to London Bridge Station and saw no one. And I was actually quite glad to see a few people on the station. It was a very strange experience. But there we go.
Absolutely. So Director of Intelligence then at Deloitte, Big Four. What does that involve? Do you have a big team? Obviously, you mentioned briefly about that you wanted to come join because of the larger projects that have more than just one, I suppose, work stream or one tail to it. What does it involve, and what has it involved since you've joined?
Well, my role is, each kind of role of sort of director is, I think, slightly different, is my sort of take on it. And essentially, some are more market facing, so client facing, and some are more kind of a specialism facing. And I'm much more market facing, so much more, swimming towards the clients, looking at those kind of client problems. And, that's really what I kind of really like doing. I've done the sort of subject matter expert piece. What I really like doing is going from, a client has a problem, and how does that match up with what we actually produce as a tangible product to try and advance what they do. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a very client-facing role, and I'll take that from end to end, from literally supporting partners who maintain relationships. They'll go out and they'll have an initial conversation to actually qualifying that and saying, well, this is what we can do for you to help that problem, all the way to actually getting the point of delivering that work and making sure that work's kind of executed in those areas as well. So that in the round is what I'm kind of doing.
Yeah, so it's very like, I might be wrong, but it's very strategic, finding solutions for the client's problems, right? And looking at a problem.
Well, yeah. I mean, the role of director is to interface with in my view, with the strategic kind of direction at the partner level, and then the tactical execution at the sort of analyst level. I think that's really the role of it, is to align those two roles, because the cycles of those actually move quite differently. So at the strategic level, it's a lot more slow and deliberate, whereas at the tactical level, it's kind of what you're doing next couple of days. And often with cybersecurity in general, it's trying to align those two together. So often hear people talking about industrial control systems. That's the next big thing. It's like, well, yeah, but what are you going to do about that? What are you going to offer to solve that problem in a tangible way for that client. And I see that kind of as a role of kind of the director, and that's what I find really interesting is sort of mapping those together.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you for the explanation. I think the big reason why I wanted to get you on to try and talk, because I know you're a huge advocate of supporting veterans to resettling from obviously the military into a career within cybersecurity, specifically threat intelligence. We've both been through it in terms of resettlement and finding a career in City Street. I suppose the first question I wanted to ask you is, if you would go back many moons ago when you had a lot shorter hair and no sideburns, what would you do? What would you do differently, or how would you? Well, would you do anything differently?
I mean, I got very lucky. There's no doubt about it. I was very lucky when I came out. So I joined ICAREC, which is Inc. Corps resettlement kind of team. You know, you pay like a 50 quid annual membership, and that was certainly the best 50 quid I ever spent. And that's how I got my start. I actually got the first job of there. The guy that's interviewed me was a former Royal Air Force officer who'd come from a technical background as well. And it just kind of clicked into place. What I would say, though, is I was very lucky to get that start. And I think I see a lot of, the advice I always give veterans is getting that first or 6 months to a year in industry is just absolutely critical. So you asked me, how do veterans get started in cyber threat intelligence? I would say, actually, what you want to be thinking about, how do you get started in cyber, which is much broader, right? So, cyber has audit, it has incident response, it has SOC, it has, all these areas, one of which is cyber threat intelligence. So what I would say to veterans coming out is aim for cyber in general. And, you will find something within that. But the large part is 18 months in cyber, and especially in Civvy Street, is a long, long time. And once you've done that and you've kind of proved that you can do that, is actually you can then chart your own course. So you can move left, you can move right, you can move around to much more of a degree, much quicker than in the public sector. That's kind of a bit slower. So I think that's probably the number one piece of advice is don't be over specific about where you want to be and what you want to be doing. You just want to get that foothold and make that first post, I suppose, after the military a success.
Very good piece of advice. I think also to expand on that, it also gives the individual, an idea of the different areas of cybersecurity, because you may come from the Inc. Corps, right, and you think naturally your transition is intelligence, whereas threat intelligence, or it's traditional intelligence, could be OSINT work, could be more technical intelligence. But actually if you went to work for, I don't know, a consultancy that gives you a breadth of exposure to different areas via different projects or because of particular clients, you might then come out of it 18 months later and say, actually, I quite like instant response. I've got a bit of a flavour for reverse engineering, or I want to do more pen testing, or so it gives you that exposure sort of straight up, as opposed to jumping in. And I think it may be a little bit more difficult to find a very particularly niche role straight off the bat, unless you are super defined in your role in the military, which is quite rare, right? So moving on to certifications, and we will keep on the intelligence theme. What's your advice if I am leaving the Inc. Corps or leaving any CAT badge? I do want to focus on intelligence, maybe not straight away, but in 18 months. What's your advice? What do I focus on?
Well, I think with qualifications, just in general, you're better off with it than you are without it. So any kind of qualification you can get, right? I think the big difference between when I was coming out and now is there are established threat intelligence programs that you can go out there and do. So obviously Crest is a large kind of organization that does that. They do the certified cyber threat intelligence manager, but also the lower level, more entry qualifications, so the threat intelligence analyst and practitioner. Just purely from an unbiased sort of perspective, these are great for the individual, because it shows a level of commitment and a level of qualification that's very transparent. So, there's no mystery behind these qualifications. You can go and see what's on the syllabi, you can see the pass mark, you can see what that person knows, and it's quite a good way to do it. So I think that's definitely a sort of starting point to look at. And then there's traditional kind of university qualifications as well. And there's a few things that are kind of open to not just veterans, but people in the workplace now. Where I've got a friend who's doing a part-time master's degree in, I believe, information security at Oxford, They've never previously offered that, but things are sort of changing in education as they are in business. So I think having a sort of short-term and longer-term plan is really part of that. And what that short-term plan looks like is kind of quick hit industry qualifications that are, 10 weeks of revision, 2-week exam, you get a qualification that will probably expire in a few years, and then a longer-term look at, for example, master's level qualifications or beyond, those kind of things. And when you're speaking to a candidate, that really comes out if they've got that trajectory about them, they've got that kind of investigative background about them. It really does differentiate people, I think, quite quickly.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I've done the Crest practitioner course, so I can. I think I agree with. It was challenging, especially from someone that doesn't come from an Intel background, and it took a lot of revision and a lot of time spent to pass that exam. But it's certainly rewarding, and I feel it was worth it. I also can. I think to add to that, if people are looking at like the comp tiers, if you have no technical knowledge, it can go right from the foundational kind of A+ up to Network Plus and Security Plus. Again, it shows the effort and I think time investment and sometimes monetary investment from when you as a hiring manager, for example, you're interviewing people, you say, well, okay, what are you currently doing to bridge that gap? That might be technical knowledge, it might be industry knowledge, it might be commercial knowledge. Show me or demonstrate to me what you've been doing, because when I employ you from day one, what's the kind of profile I'm going to have in my team, and what's the added value, right?
Yeah, you also need to think about where you are applying and what you aspire to do. So, from consultancy background, the big thing that we're selling is consultancy, right? We're selling subject matter experts in that. And you do see clients specifying types of qualifications they want to see. So, CREST, CompTIA, that type of thing, they'll explicitly kind of mention those. So if somebody comes along and they've got that, then that's great. That's like kind of a, foot in the door. I think the way that's going to develop in the future is you're going to see more regulation into the cybersecurity profile of the private sector. So, for example, you won't just be able to set up as a bank and just do your own thing. You'll have to have certain things in place that external bodies, like the Big Four, can come in and set up for you, and you'll need appropriately qualified people. So you see this with like the CBEST program in particular, where you have to have people with certain sets of qualifications to go out and bid and execute on those projects. So therefore, if you have that qualification, you're just making yourself more competitive kind of within that space. So again, going back to what I was saying, you're better off with it than you are without it. Of course, for every one job where that applies, there's 10 where it just doesn't, and the person's more interested in, what you do for fun. Maybe, I don't know, you go with the team. Totally valid. But you can always kind of get to that down the way.
As obviously you're in a hiring managing position, and you have been for a number of years prior to Deloitte as well. Are there any do's and don'ts? And I'm going to put you on the spot here. But when you have people applying, it might be from the piece of paper, i.e. a CV, to when they're actually in front of you. Are there big things to avoid more than anything that people can kind of keep an eye out for?
Get the basics nailed. Don't swear. Don't spell things wrong on your CV. Don't turn up late to an interview. Wear a suit. And that's not flippant, because I've had ex-veterans do all of those like fairly consistently. So there's the basic kind of stuff of thinking about you're going into a company, and then that company is going to put you in front of their clients who are Fortune 500 banks, they're massive telecommunication companies, and would you be happy going out there doing that? I think that's the very kind of first sort of litmus test that you need to be kind of applying. That's great. And if you can just nail that, then that means that's not a problem. So nobody's like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. He turned up 10 minutes late in a fleece. Like I remember that one very clearly. Then you can get on to actually talking. Then you can get on to actually talking about, why you for the job. And I think a big part is with any job, you're never going to be 100% qualified for that role right from the get-go. And if you are, it's the wrong job for you, because you're not going to stick at it. So it's kind of like the 70-30 rule. This guy or girl has probably got 70%, and then we can work on the 30%, and that keeps them engaged before they sort of step up to the next point. And I think the big part is I'm just looking for that kind of passion in what people are doing. If somebody's passionate about one thing, be it a technical thing, that'll probably transfer, is usually the bet that you're making. So, for example, I interviewed a guy, and he was a former veteran, and the interview was kind of so-so, and then we got on to identity and access management, which frankly I knew nothing about, but he knew a huge amount about, and he just totally lit up. We went completely over time, and literally it was the most interesting conversation I've ever had about anything, and he got the job. It was like, that's great. That's exactly what I want to see, because he transferred that into threat intelligence, he did so fairly easily. I think also as well, do your homework, right? So if you go to like Google and type in, nation state cyber threats, you will find literally more pages than you will ever be able to read. So do some reading, turn up with a point, read about what's in the newspaper. So, this nation state group's been involved in this, hack has been doing that, and try and set the tone of the conversation. Ask what that person's opinion is. What do you think about ransomware, and what do you think it's going to develop? And then it just turns it into more of a conversation than just a straight flat interview. I think that's certainly the winning formula for me, at least. But there we go.
Yeah, it shows time invested again, doesn't it? It doesn't have to be about qualification or a bit of studying or material. It could be about, like you said, if I'm interviewing for you and it's for a role that's in a particular location, for example, it's understanding. If I even come to you and say, hey, I saw something in the news recently and it's a geopolitical issue, I think that might have a knock-on effect with how that threat actor in that space is going to change their threat vector to attack someone. Or it's now, are they going to switch fire on targets to a different sector because of X, Y, and Z? It's being aware of just matching up the kind of lines and the dots, right? But if you don't know what you don't know, so go out there and find it and research.
And also think about the person who's interviewing you, why they got into cyber. So anybody of my age got into it when it wasn't big, and I got into it because it was. I thought it'll be good fun for 6 months before I need to get a real job. 10 years later, I'm still at it.
Stuck.
Can't escape. But the big thing is, what I do now is much more kind of managerial. But nonetheless, it still gets the blood pumping when I'm, hearing about some kind of crazy exploit or something like that. And if somebody come in and speak to me about that, straight away we're building up that kind of affinity.
Yeah, I totally agree. And back on a point, actually, the 70-30 fit. I think you took that straight from the Trident playbook, because we're big on that. Like, we're trying to educate people all the time, hiring managers all the time, that if I bring you 100% gold standard candidate, you won't keep them for longer than 6 months. They'll want top end of the budget. They'll want to be constantly doing new things and more exciting things, and constantly probably trying to promotions and things. So if you take somebody 70% fit, still very competent, not quite at 100% like capable of, I don't know, every single piece of the job role or responsibilities on a spec, but has the I think potential to grow into that with a bit of training and guidance and investment. You're going to have that person for 2, 3, 4 years, right? Which is almost double what the retention rate is in this industry. Anyway.
And I think it's important to understand the cultural differences of recruitment as well. So I remember when I applied for my first job, it was an American company, and the criteria was 4 pages long. It was literally bullet points, 4 pages long, and it was like ability to speak fluent Russian. It's like, okay, I don't have any of those, but I gave it a try. And I actually spoke to the hiring manager after, and he was like, yeah, that's just an American CV. You basically just chuck absolutely everything you can, and then you see who turns up. And whereas the UK, people are very much in the mindset of, if I don't fit all of these, I'm not going to apply.
Yep.
So I think that's important as well, is to be quite critical. What is must have and what is nice to have, because you can flex on the nice to have, but the must have, is much more of a don't apply, because if you don't have that, you are wasting your time, or you're wasting their time. I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, it's a really critical point. And also flip it on its head. If you're a candidate looking at these adverts, thinking, wow, I can't speak Russian, or hang on, I don't have a degree, or I don't have CIS, don't always let that put you off from applying, because then it fits to the 70-30 rule, right? Within certain parameters, there's obviously a kind of a defined rule where you can't be spamming your CV to everything, but don't be put off just because it says 3 to 5 years industry experience, must have CIS, but must have a degree or a master's. A lot of that is just very much cut and paste, old school kind of repetition from old job descriptions.
Correct. Yeah, and the large part is there's a lot of things that you don't see. So no job sits in isolation. a lot of the time, because of the market, recruiters will be, looking at filling 2 to 3 posts. They'll range from, analyst to sort of senior manager. So if you have a really strong fit for the analyst, and that person doesn't speak a word of Russian, then you can transfer that onto one of the other pieces and go for that skill set off the back end of that. So again, it's not like sort of the military where like everybody has to have an in-date PFT to deploy. That's it. There's no leeway. It's not like that. It's much more of a blend in the private sector. So it's always worth kind of having that conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then just lastly, I want to talk about the actual job search process, right? And we don't have to take too long on this because I've taken up enough of your time. But I think it's really important for people who are, they've just put their chit in, they've just done the 7 clicks to freedom, if it still is that anymore. And it's kind of like, wow, what do I do now, right? So we spoke about kind of elements of the CV, and we can go into that in a separate video because that is a whole piece by itself. But think about the job search and the process and how you go about it. Now, we spoke about kind of looking at different job descriptions and the different expectations on that, and don't let it put you off and things, and American versus English kind of processes. But also, I want to talk about keeping a track of your job applications. So things like, you can be as basic as you want and go to a spreadsheet and put in different tabs at the bottom. I advise people all the time to do this because a job search can be a job in itself, right? So what do you think about having a spreadsheet with different tabs with job applications, another tab which is conversations I've had, another tab might be networking events? What do you think of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there is kind of different kind of activities. So again, when I speak to kind of veterans, the one thing that matters is getting a job. That's it. And everything should be leading up to that kind of point. However, a more kind of nuanced sort of approach is, in your scenario, you've just literally signed off that day. Take, for example, then immediately you're presented with, do I want public or private sector? If you want to go public sector, your window for application is immediately, because they will employ you with kind of a year to go, for kind of maybe 18 months hence. They will do that. So you see that with government departments and security services and things like that. Whereas the private sector is usually much more immediate. So you do speak to candidates and they're like, oh, I'm a month out from getting unemployed and I'm on final interviews. Where what's going on here? It's like, well, that's probably about right, because you'll have that final interview. Week later, you'll have a contract. You sign it. You don't. That's you turn up a couple of weeks later. It's a lot faster, kind of moving. In the interim, there's all the activities that you were talking about there, and the big thing is networking. So network, and network some more. So that's the big thing. And do it physically as well. So there's LinkedIn and other kind of social media platforms out there, and that's important to kind of use those. But I know that's difficult in sort of COVID times, but get out there and do sort of physical networking as well, in regional areas and stuff like that. It really is worth your time to go out your way to go and do those. And if you're thinking, well, where do I spend my money? That's where, go out there, get to meet people, get to know people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that takes us back full circle to when you were talking about the ICAREC. Signing up to the ICAREC is probably the best thing you've ever done, right? And how many physical events they do one every month or every bi-monthly or quarterly, don't they? Yeah.
And your regimental or whatever resettlement guys do a great job. I mean, ICAREC does a fantastic kind of job. With that, I only went to a couple of networking things, but I still to this day still subscribe to it. And the amount of work that I kind of got from that was pretty huge. Even with the limited kind of cyber exposure, it doesn't matter. You just need one person to say yes. That's all you need.
Yeah.
So it's just a contact game. The more people you touch, all you need is that one person to give you that break.
Yeah, I completely agree. So moving on, Stu, what does, in your own opinion, the future of threat intelligence look like? Broad question.
Right.
Okay, good.
Again, kind of going back to sort of the early days of threat intel, the stuff that we were talking about, actually kind of computer hackers doing was purely sort of theoretical. We've seen it. The big mistake we made was we didn't dream big enough. You've seen huge kind of events. You've seen critical systems inside financial networks compromised. You've seen nation states entering cyber criminal games to back up their economy. You've seen people deploying nation state capabilities to target sporting events. You've seen critical infrastructure disrupted. You've seen all these kind of things as well. And the role of threat intel within that is just going to be central. So understanding your adversary, understanding what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, is going to be kind of integral. Where things are changing a little bit was, CTI needs to play well with others. So it needs to be part of incident response, needs to be part of vulnerability management. And just like the military went through a phase of deciding that it wants to be threat-led, so cybersecurity is kind of catching up. And so it'll just play a bigger part of that. So what does that look like for the individual? More technical, so not just doing what you do in isolation. It's understanding about incident response processes, malware, those types of things as well. But also kind of a happier place because you're demonstrating impact sort of straight away. I think the final kind of area it's going to go is you're going to see more, not necessarily regulation, but regulator involvement within cyber threat intelligence. So you're seeing this in the UK, you're seeing this in the Netherlands, you're seeing this in Singapore and Hong Kong and Asia, where the financial regulators are saying, actually, what are you doing about understanding threats to people operating within those environments? That's paving the way towards regulation. And if that's paving the way towards regulation, that's the best chance CTI has to finally kind of cash the check that it's been talking about and saying, well, you need us. Well, now's the opportunity to do so. So it's a pretty exciting time to be in it, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's been backed up by Norway have joined the run as well, haven't they? On the Tiber stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tiber EU, that type of stuff as well.
Yeah.
50 member companies, it's a huge amount of work,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be only good for the industry, I believe, and like you said, solidify its place within cybersecurity in the wider infosec world.
Yeah.
So look, thank you very much for joining us, and I really appreciate it. I think it's been super useful for veterans, and just generally, I think the threat intel community would have really enjoyed your conversation and what you have to say. I'm not going to let you go though without one question. Fastball. Stu, if you were not in threat intelligence or cybersecurity, what do you think you'd be doing?
Strangely enough,
keep it clean.
Yeah. There's what I'd like to be doing. There's what I'd actually kind of be doing. I'd probably be an architect. Actually, I've always really liked architecture, so geometry and stuff like that. I've always really been into it, and sort of Bauhaus and brutalism. So yeah, I'd probably be designing some horrible skyscraper in like the 4-meter block or something, talking about the lines and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's probably what I'd be doing.
Nice, interesting. I didn't know that. Very interesting. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us, and we'll speak soon.
Yeah, all right, good stuff.
Thanks. Cheers, Stu.
Brilliant.